House Republican caucus had put a bill in to address educational impacts with COVID. And I think all four of our caucuses share the concerns that we have seen over the past year in our educational system. I'm not going to read the testimony, we've submitted it. And I think that Senate Bill 977 touches on some important areas for virtual learning. I think as we move forward, it's important that the state provides sort of more guidance and input on how virtual learning should be done at the local level. And I just wanted to suggest some additions potentially to consider. When I hear from some of the administrators and teachers in districts, I come from a school district that opened up on September 8th and stayed open, but provided the opportunity also to learn virtually as well. And maybe analyzing the impacts of providing options for our teachers, how they were able to navigate both. I do hear from the educational community not to provide options. It was too difficult for them. So maybe having that legislation look at the impact of providing simultaneous educational options. Also looking at the impacts that virtual learning has on our special education population and how we move forward in educating them if we ever need to return to a virtual learning world. Is there a platform that might be more successful for them? Or do we need to find an in-person model for our special education children, no matter what? And also just looking at, the absenteeism, the impacts of has it created sort of chronic absenteeism, the transitions from in-person to virtual learning, the impacts on our children. We're seeing the high anxiety levels, I think, of transferring back and forth. And I think to that point is trying, and I think the bill sort of touches on it, but touching on the issue of snow days. When snow days were canceled and replaced with virtual learning, I didn't see it as a big deal. But my wife, being an early childhood educator, believes that it's important that the children have an opportunity to experience snow days. Our district was in person the entire time, so you would have thought when we had a snow day, we would have just canceled school, but they actually transitioned to virtual. So our district became virtual for snow days only, which was a little odd. So I just think that rather than checking the box and filling the requirement of the 180 days, that we look at a more unified standard so we don't see this transition of back and forth for virtual learning. And if we do utilize virtual learning, providing a meaningful platform for it. My final point is I did have an individual who reached out to me whose children cannot be in person due to medical conditions of COVID, and they are high risk. And she also suggested, and I just want to bring this to the committee's attention, is looking at providing a virtual learning platform for those children who may not be able to come back into the school even next year. And there are programs out there that offer a exclusive virtual learning platform that could be appropriate for the couple of hundred children that might have to remain virtual. Because I think for teachers to try to do both at the same time, the children are missing out. So,
Representative McCarty, who has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome Minority Leader Candelora to the Education Committee. It's so good to see you today. I would just like to first recognize your great interest in improving virtual learning and for all of the work that you have done to bring this proposal forward. It's, as we all know, the optimal learning platform is in-person learning, but we don't know where we will be going forward. I think it's incumbent upon us to have good virtual learning minimum standards. And so I really appreciate your work in that regard. And also bringing new recommendations that may have been overlooked in the language in this bill, particularly what you just spoke about with the special ed students and their needs. So I really appreciate that. I'm not sure if you were present earlier today when the commissioner spoke about virtual learning. I think she also recognized the importance going forward, but she did make a comment about professional development and offering flexibility to the districts. Can you just comment whether you would be in agreement with looking across the board where the districts are and then deciding whether to offer flexibility on the local level to determine what type of training and professional development is needed? So just your personal comments in that regard, and anything else you would like to add to this bill. Thank you.
Sure. No, thank you for that question. I think generally it was something that we also wanted to see in the bill was the training platform for our teachers. One of the things that we experienced in our town was when we started out with the in-person platform, despite the fact that so many children going back to school, we did have a number of children that decided to stay home and learn from via distance learning. It doubled the workload and probably tripled the workload for our teachers. And so I think what we saw in a lot of schools did this was went to a half day on Wednesdays just to give the teachers the ability to sort of transition back and forth from in-person learning to virtual learning. And I think that's important to look at, not just giving the school districts the flexibility to provide these platforms, but I think as we're putting together the metrics at the state level, recognizing that if we are going to have that type of a structure, that there is going to be more support needed for our teaching staff, because it's not easier just to go virtual. I think from what I hear, many teachers would prefer to be back in person, and they're really struggling with having to do both, which many districts are doing right now. And so I think that this is an opportunity, while it's still fresh in all of our minds. Hopefully we don't have to see this type of platform again next year, but I think it's incumbent upon us to look at these issues while we're experiencing them. So if this ever happens again, we'll be much better off.